Live from the Vatican, this is BBC News, the latest headlines. Prayers for Pope Francis at his private chapel as the Vatican announces his funeral will take place on Saturday. Well, the service will take place outdoors in front of the Basilica of St. Peter's. Thousands are expected to pay their respects. And mourning continues around the world. Millions of Catholics lighting candles and saying prayers for the pontiff.
I'm Anita McVeigh in London. Our other headlines this hour. US Vice President J.D. Vance continues his trip to India. He says Donald Trump wants a win-win partnership.
And lift off. Go Falcon, go Bandwagon 3.
And one giant leap for cosmic cuisine, the bold experiment that could lead to food being grown in space.
Hello and welcome to News Now. I'm Marianne Mashiri here at the Vatican, where it's been confirmed in the last few hours that the funeral of Pope Francis will take place on Saturday morning. The pontiff died early on Monday, and the Vatican has told us that he passed away from a stroke and subsequent heart failure. Well, let's take a look now at St. Peter's Square and the Basilica. It's an absolutely beautiful day here, and many thousands of people are already lining the streets around the Basilica to come and pay their respects. They include pilgrims, worshippers, but also tourists, people who found themselves here over the Easter holidays and who want to come and pay their respects. Now, Pope Francis last appeared in public on Sunday for an Easter blessing in front of crowds of worshippers. That came after weeks of poor health and hospitalisation with pneumonia. Well, let's briefly talk now about what we are expecting in the coming days and hours, because the passing of a pope sets off a chain of events that have been written in history. First of all, we're going to be seeing Pope Francis' body resting in the chapel at his St. Martha residence. That is already happening right now. Let's show you those official pictures that we've received from St. Martha's chapel. The Pope will then be moved by procession from St. Martha's chapel to St. Peter's Basilica, where he will lie in state from Wednesday morning. And that is also where his funeral will be held. And the funeral mass will take place just outside the Basilica in St. Peter's Square. And as for the leadership of the church, well, the vote to select the new leader will take place here at the Sistine Chapel in the coming weeks. So over the coming hours, we're going to look at the impact that the Pope has had, the legacy that remains, and also the impact he's had on Catholicism around the world. But first, a look at his life from my colleague, Sarah Rainsford.
Prayers for a Pope who touched the hearts of many millions all over the world, and who is being remembered here in Rome with real affection. Pope Francis had been ill for many weeks, but his death was still a shock to many who had seen him right here just a day before, outside St. Peter's. He'd appeared after the Easter Sunday Mass. His frailty, after a long battle with pneumonia, was clear to see. But this is a holy year for Catholics, and being with them at Easter was hugely important to the Pope. As his death was announced and bells tolled over the Vatican, Catholics shared their memories.
He put a lot of effort into people inside and outside the church realize that we can communicate and help each other, and that's the most basic and important thing that he left behind, communication and giving each other a hand to help.
In one of many ancient rituals to come, the Pope's apartment has been sealed, his ring smashed. The papal seat is now officially vacant until a conclave and an election. And the flags here have been lowered for 9 days of official mourning. Far from Rome, in Argentina, the loss is felt keenly. This is the country where Pope Francis was born to Italian immigrants. One reason why he always urged compassion for migrants across the world.
He was more than a pope. He was politician, he was humanitarian. He represented even the ones that didn't believe in God and made everyone feel so heard.
In London too, at Westminster Cathedral, there were prayers, candles and even tears.
I think he was wonderful. His simplicity, his kindness, his care of people. I loved the fact that he lived in the hostel and didn't want to sleep in all the smart places, that they gave him, and that he was a very simple man.
The Pope's last testament has now been revealed, remembering those who prayed for him and offering up his own suffering for peace in the world and fraternity among peoples. It included his request to be buried not in the Vatican, but in a church where he liked to pray in central Rome. And a Pope of famously simple tastes wants his tomb marked only with his name.
Well, of course, the reaction has been a little bit one of shock and surprise. Why? Well, over the Easter weekend, the Pope made a surprise appearance in the square behind me, and people were surprised and astonished to see him out and about. He got on the Pope-mobile, he talked to people. So although he was an 88-year-old man, although he had health problems, there is a palpable sense of shock here in the Vatican. I want to talk you through a couple of the newspaper headlines from today, and this one is from the Corriere della Sera, and you can see here a picture of Pope Francis and the headline Il Papa degli Ultimi, which basically translates as the Pope of the least. So that refers to the closeness the Pope wanted to feel towards people who were poorer, people who were marginalised in society. In Giornale, the headline says Addio Papa Scomodo. That's a really interesting headline. Papa Scomodo means the uncomfortable Pope, and that, if you read the article, refers to the fact that he was a Pope that really traversed the lines between progressiveness and conservatism in the Catholic world. So talking very much about that. Il Tempo has the headline, the very simple headline, Ciao Francesco, and it tells the time of his death. Il Santo Padre è morto a Santa Maria ieri alle 7:35. The sacred Pope died at 7:35 in the morning, with a picture of him there. And finally, we have La Stampa newspaper, which has the simple headline, Era Francesco, the era of Francesco. The Pope died at 7:35 on Easter Monday during the Jubilee year. And of course, it is a Jubilee year. It's a very, very important year in the Roman Catholic calendar. So as I said earlier, the legacy of Pope Francis is a deep and meaningful one. He became Pope in 2013, and he promised at that point to bring about various elements of fundamental change to the Catholic Church. Did he succeed? And what kind of a man was he? Well, a little earlier, I spoke to Austin Ivory, who is his official biographer, about what kind of a man the Pope was. Have a listen.
I mean, it's very, when you're in his company, he immediately makes you feel at ease. I have to say, every time I went to see him in the last few years, before seeing him, I always felt very nervous because the office of Pope is so awesome. But as soon as I was with him, immediately felt relaxed and at ease. So he was a tremendously attractive person to be with. He made you feel seen and recognised. And I think people who knew him back in Argentina, and I've spoken, of course, to many of them when I wrote the biography, would say the same thing, that they described him as a kind of a captivating personality. When you were with him, you were the one that was special.
Now, one of the things that's very interesting about the next few days is the place where Pope Francis' body will be interred, the Basilica di Santa Maria Maggiore. He's the first Pope in, I think, over 100 years to decide not to be interred here in St. Peter's Basilica. Why did he make that decision? Was it connected to his Jesuit roots?
In death, as in life, he wants to be in the place of the poor. He was always convinced that the church should be where the poor are, because, as it were, Jesus came for the poor, for the suffering, for the people in the margins. In a way, his whole papacy was about bringing the peripheries into the centre, to challenge the centre, to shake us, as it were, out of our comfort, and to open our eyes and our hearts to the suffering, because he was convinced that when we do that, that's when we see what God wants us to do, and that the ills of this world, if you like, are from our indifference, come from our closing in on ourselves. So he was always wanting to bring us out of ourselves. That was an expression he used a lot. And he did that himself. He himself came out to people and of course, famously embraced them, hugged them. I remember that moment in the square very early on in the papacy when he kissed a man with neurofibromatosis, a really quite horrendous facial disfigurement, and he just kissed him and hugged him. And afterwards the man said, he had never felt so loved in his life. Gestures like that he was a master of.
What a lovely story there. Austin Ivory there talking to me. And of course, the Pope touched so many people. He travelled to 67 countries, believe it or not, during his 12 years as Pope. And he also met so many people here in the Vatican as well. And one such person is Anna Murray. Now, Anna is a junior doctor who lives in Belfast, but who met the Pope in 2022 here at the Vatican. And we have the pleasure of speaking to Anna now. It's lovely to talk to you, Anna. And if I can ask you, first of all, what was it like to meet the Pope in the Vatican?
It was the highlight of my life so far, and I'm sure it'll be a highlight for many years to come. We were told the night before we were going to meet him that we would meet him the following morning in his own private library. And we were led through the Vatican. We obviously looked as nervous as we felt. There was a cardinal who came out of the private library. He was having a meeting with the Holy Father, and he said, "Don't be anxious, just treat this like meeting your grandfather." And that's exactly how it felt. The Pope shook all our hands. He himself opened the door. He'd prepared a speech to give to us, and he said, "You can read this all in your own time, just ask me whatever you would like." And we did. We asked him about his time in university, about how we as students could promote gospel values and how we could use our own vocations to do that. And it was like meeting your grandfather. And I think that's why many Catholics today are feeling the loss of Pope Francis, because we're not only losing a pontiff and a world leader and a church leader, we're losing someone who feels like a member of our extended family. So it's definitely something I'll remember forever.
Absolutely, yes. When you talk about that, about the feeling of, making you trying to make you feel relaxed and trying to make you feel comfortable, and it's part of who Pope Francis was. He was known, wasn't he, by many as the people's Pope. How did you feel in that moment when he took your hand and spoke to you?
I think that's one of the things that many people remember about Pope Francis. You could be a prisoner, you could be a student from Belfast, you could be someone who's ill, and Pope Francis had a way of making you feel that you were the only person in the room that mattered, and that you were loved and you were seen and you were known. And I think that day, that's all we felt. We felt pure joy at meeting the Holy Father, but we also felt that we were the only ones in the room, and he cared about us, and he felt that we were important. And even in his words and his advice about how to evangelize as students, he said things as simple as talking to people about the Gospels, on the bus or in a coffee shop or even in the pub when you're socialising. He said all those little things make a difference, and the saints are ordinary people that live extraordinary lives. And I think that's exactly what Pope Francis was. In his very ordinary way, he did extraordinary things, and in that way made people extraordinary.
Anna, can I ask you, what was it that you and your friends were doing in the Vatican? Why had you been invited here? Why were you meeting the Pope?
So it was the 50th anniversary of the Queen's University Belfast Catholic Chaplaincy. So it was a part of those celebrations. We were also joined by Reverend Steve Stockman, who's a Presbyterian minister in Belfast, and Father Martin McGill. And those two individuals are very involved in Belfast in ecumenical work and peace projects. And the Pope himself had recognised their work in Belfast in bringing about change. And Steve Stockman made himself known to the Pope and said, "Pope Francis, I'm the only Presbyterian in the room." And the Pope said, "Well then, Steve, you're the most welcome." And I think even that for us in Belfast, Pope Francis, reaching across the sectarian divide in Belfast and Northern Ireland, it was a great day for us and a great day for Belfast as well.
Wow, Anna, that's a really lovely story. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us. Anna Murray there, junior doctor in Belfast. Thanks again.
Thank you.
So, the death of a pope, it starts a chain of events, an inevitable chain of events, which start with his lying in state. They move on to his funeral. And then, of course, after that, the Novem Diales, the 9 days of mourning, followed by the conclave, the process by which a new pope will be decided. We'll have a little bit more information on what that entails, how long it could take, and who the frontrunners are after this short break. Around the world and across the UK, you're watching BBC News. Welcome back to the Vatican. And as I mentioned before that short break, there are a series of events that are going to happen over the coming days and weeks that will culminate in the new Pope being decided here at the Vatican. And to talk a little bit more about what the process means and what it's going to entail, I'm joined by former Rome correspondent and colleague Mark Lower. Mark, good to see you. Talk me first of all through the next couple of days, because at the moment the body lies in the chapel of the residence of St. Martha. What's happening on Wednesday, and then looking ahead, what's happening over the coming days?
So on Wednesday, tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. local time, the body, Pope Francis' body and the coffin will be transferred to St. Peter's Basilica there behind us, which towers over St. Peter's Square. This gorgeous Renaissance and Baroque cathedral, 15th, 16th century, topped by the dome designed by Michelangelo, of course. And that is where he will lie in state between Wednesday and Saturday. And we're expecting very large crowds to go in and see his open casket and to pay their final farewell to Pope Francis. Then on Saturday morning at 10 a.m. local time, the funeral will begin, and that will be a funeral that will attract the heads of state and royalty from right across the world. We know already that Donald Trump and his wife Melania will be there. The presidents of France and Brazil have confirmed their attendance. The president of Ukraine is said to be on his way as well to come to that on Saturday. And then after the funeral on Saturday, his coffin will be transferred across Rome to the Basilica di Santa Maria Maggiore. That is on the other side of Rome, and that is where Pope Francis said that he wanted to be buried. Now, it is rare for popes not to be buried at the Vatican. It's more than 100 years since a pope was not buried at the Vatican, and it's very much typical of the kind of slightly more humble, quieter end to his life that he wanted.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, he streamlined the funeral as well, hasn't he? Because in the past, popes were buried in 3 different coffins, starting with a cypress coffin. But he has wanted to do things differently from the start.
He wants to be in a coffin that was wood and zinc, and just to be laid in the ground simply with his name in Latin, Franciscus. This is a man who, from his humble beginnings, then that very much shaped his humility as Pope, taking the name Francis after St. Francis of Assisi, shunning the kind of ornate clothing, for example, of his predecessor. He didn't like the red papal shoes. He wore his slightly scuffed black shoes. He lived, as you say, Mariam, in the Santa Marta guest house, not in the elaborate, ornate papal apartments. And that will shape the end of his life, just as it shaped his papacy as well.
And of course, the conclave happens after those 9 days of official mourning. A very secretive process that I have to say fascinates so many people around the world, not least because of the Oscar-nominated movie.
Yeah, indeed, which I'm sure you and I have seen,
and
many of others have seen as well. And having been based here for 5 years and talking to a lot of people about how a conclave works, I think there's a lot of truth in that movie about how suddenly all the cardinals are shut inside the Sistine Chapel. The shutters come down. They're cut off from the outside world. There are no phones. There's no TV. There's no connectivity with the outside world. There is simply the presence of the Holy Spirit. And then they cast their votes. They've got to be under the age of 80, the cardinal electors.
So what, 138 of them? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And they will cast their votes. On the first day of voting, there'll be 1 vote, and then followed by that, there'll be 2 votes in the morning and 2 in the afternoon. initially for a cardinal to get a 2/3 majority to be named pope. If that does not, after 15 days there's no requisite 2/3 majority, it changes to a 50% plus one vote, and then after each vote the ballot papers are burned. And if there is no conclusive winner of the conclave, there is a special chemical put in for the smoke to be black. But if there is a cardinal who emerges victorious to be chosen as the next successor to St. Peter, as the 267th Pope, then a chemical is put in for white smoke to come up from a chimney just across there, across St. Peter's Square, and that is when we are.
Here, then, Mark?
Yeah, we will be able to see it from here, and that is where we are likely to hear the cheers of. There will probably be. I mean, there will certainly be hundreds of thousands of people from St. Peter's Square down the road into central Rome, and that is when we will know that there is a new Pope.
Okay, well, Mark, thank you very much indeed for that. My colleague and former Rome correspondent, Mark Lowen there. Well, Mark mentioned the decision to make, to decide on a new Pope. And, you know, this is a critical moment for the Catholic Church because there are popes now, there are cardinals, from all over the world. And Pope Francis appointed 110 of those 138 cardinals who will be eligible to be voted in as the next pope. And 3 of the top contenders are from the African continent, from Guinea, from Ghana, from the Democratic Republic of Congo. My colleague Chris Ewoko spoke to the Archbishop of the Abuja Diocese about the prospect of a pope from the continent of Africa once again.
Historically, we are told there were popes that were black, but that was maybe in the early centuries of the church. But in modern times, there hasn't been any black pope. And who says a black person cannot be a pope? Any baptized Catholic, in theory, can be a pope. They can decide to choose anybody who is an ordinary Christian, Catholic. They can ordain him and promote him until he becomes a pope.
Well, he's talking there about modern times because, of course, the last pope from the African continent was Pope Gelasius I, and he died 1,500 years ago. Well, the person speaking to the cardinal there was my colleague Chris Ewoko from Abuja. Let's have a listen to what he said about that interview.
He's been the Archbishop of the Abuja Diocese and leads one of the big congregations here in Nigeria. Of course, Nigeria has a very large Catholic community in Africa, and there's this very strong connection between the Catholic Church of the country and, of course, the Catholic leadership with the Pope as the head in Rome. So it's on the basis of this that I spoke to him yesterday, reacting to the Pope's death, as well as the expectation for an African Pope this time around when a new Pope is elected.
And what legacy did Pope Francis leave behind for the continent of Africa, Chris?
Well, Pope Francis actually left this legacy of commitment to Africa's, I would say, quest for peace, quest for social justice, and quest for development. As a matter of fact, he visited so many countries in Africa, about 12 or 13 of African countries, including Kenya, Uganda, Central African Republic. And what we can even remember in one of those visits that resonate among the people was when he was, I think he visited the Democratic Republic of Congo, and there he also called on people around the world to hands off Democratic Republic of Congo, hands off Africa, because Africa is not a mine site where people should now go and mine their resources. And that statement really resonates. He's also been very keen about the poor and the conflict in Africa. He visited South Sudan and urged for peace and resolution of the conflict in many of those countries.
Well, other leaders from other faiths have also been paying tribute to Pope Francis. He did much to bring together the faiths with Catholicism. Let me read you a couple of those. Pai Sahib, Professor Mohinder Singh, chairman of the Sikh organisation Guru Nanak Nishkam Sevak Jutha, said this: Pope Francis was a light in the world, a rare and remarkable soul. His life reminds us that peace on earth begins with love in the heart and unity among all peoples. Well, Pai Sahib met the Pope in the Vatican in 2018, where the Pope blessed the Peace Charter scroll. We've also had some reaction from the Muslim Council of Britain, who said throughout his papacy he embodied the universal values that both Islam and Christianity hold dear: mercy, compassion and service to humanity. We've also heard from various voices in the Jewish community, including the rabbi of New North London Synagogue, Jonathan Wittenberg, who said Pope Francis touched the heart of humanity and will be deeply missed by people of all faiths. In his visit to the region, Pope Francis prayed for peace in the Middle East and the safety of both Israel and its neighbours. Well, here in Italy, in the last few minutes, the government has announced 5 days of national mourning. Many countries, many Catholic countries, including Spain, have already done so. And let's just take you to those live pictures once again of St. Peter's Basilica. This is where on Wednesday the Pope's body will arrive. On Saturday, the funeral will take place. And 9 days later, the conclave to decide a new Pope will also take place. We'll have more throughout the day from the Vatican on BBC News.